There are ships that disappeared at sea and were never seen again by those on board, but some of them didn't completely vanish. They quietly remained under the ocean, untouched for hundreds of years, in some cases, thousands of years. And when they were found, it was as if time had stopped. There are ship hulls that still retain their shape, ropes that are still attached, amphorae, belongings, and personal items left exactly where they were last touched. According to marine archaeologists, the extreme cold, lack of oxygen, and the depth of some parts of the sea are the reasons why these remain preserved. It's like a time capsule, as if an entire part of history was sealed and then reopened after a very long time. In this video, we will take a look at some of the most amazing shipwreck discoveries found under the ocean, from ancient trading ships to giant vessels that suddenly disappeared at sea and reappeared after a long silence. Each one has its own mystery, and under the water where there is almost no light, they are still there, silent, unmoving, but as if waiting to be seen again. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. This means a lot to us content creators. Thank you. And now, let's begin. Number 10. The ship that is still almost completely intact after sinking. More than 300 years have passed. In Stockholm, Sweden, there is a warship that became a symbol not of victory, but of a very costly mistake. Its name is Vasa. It was built in the early 17th century as the pride of the Swedish Navy. It was one of the most ambitious military projects of its time. It was large, heavily armed, and built to showcase the kingdom's power in the Baltic Sea. The ship was full of intricate details. There were hundreds of wooden sculptures. On the outside, the paint was colorful, and it was armed with numerous bronze cannons. But as the ship grew bigger, the problems also grew. There was too much weight on top and not enough weight below to balance it. According to the Vasa Museum in Sweden, even before it left the harbor, some people had already noticed its stability issues. A simple test was conducted. The crew was made to run from one side of the deck to the other to see how much it would move. But the test was stopped early, because even with that much swaying, it was already dangerous. Nevertheless, the voyage still continued. On August 10, 1628, the Vasa left Stockholm harbor in front of a large crowd watching from the shore. The journey was short. A few minutes after leaving, a strong wind hit. The ship tilted slightly. Then it leaned even more and became heavier on one side. And because the gun ports on the lower deck were open, water quickly rushed in. Within moments, it sank right in front of the city that built it. It didn't disappear in the middle of a storm or out at sea, but right next to the harbor. There it remained at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. But what's surprising is that this is also the reason why it survived. According to marine researchers, the Baltic Sea is unique. The water has low salinity and there are almost no shipworms that destroy wood. So instead of rotting, the Vasa remained intact, quiet, buried, as if it was just sealed underwater. After more than 300 years, the wreck was found in 1956 by Swedish researcher Anders Fransson. After several years of preparation, it was officially lifted from the seabed in 1961. That was one of the most complicated marine recovery operations of that time. And when the ship emerged from the water, most of its original hull was still clearly visible. According to the Vasa Museum, a large part of its original timber structure is still preserved. Thousands of items were also recovered from inside: tools, clothes, crew equipment, and other personal belongings that were left there since it sank. Now the Vasa is in a museum in Stockholm, no longer as a weapon of war, but as a reminder of how small the gap is between ambition and mistake. A ship built to rule the seas, but it didn't even make it out of the harbor. Number 9, Endurance, Antarctica. There are ships that disappear at sea and are never seen again, but the Endurance, it's like it refused to be lost. In 1915, the explorer Ernest Shackleton led an expedition to Antarctica. His ship, the Endurance, was supposed to be the lifeline of the entire mission, but things didn't go as planned. While crossing the Weddell Sea, the ship became trapped in thick sea ice. For many months it couldn't move. The ice around it gradually tightened, and as time passed, the pressure grew stronger. Eventually, the wooden hull began to crack. In the end, it finally sank into the icy waters of Antarctica. From the surface of the ice, Shackleton and his crew could do nothing but watch as it disappeared beneath the sea. But what followed was even more harrowing. They were left stranded in the middle of the ice, far from any help, in one of the harshest places on Earth. And against all odds, they all survived. Because of that, the Endurance expedition became one of the most famous survival stories in the history of polar exploration. But the ship itself was lost for over 100 years. Historians knew its estimated location, but the place was almost impossible to reach. The sea ice is thick almost all year round, and the water beneath it is very deep. In 2022, the search began again. Using autonomous underwater vehicles sent beneath the ice, the Endurance 22 expedition found the wreck on the seabed of the Weddell Sea. And when the first footage came out, the researchers could hardly believe it. The ship was still standing, almost intact. According to the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust, it is at a depth of almost 3,000 meters. The rudder is still visible, the deck is intact, and the name Endurance can still be read at the stern of the ship. Because of the extremely cold water in Antarctica, its wood was preserved in extraordinary condition. Almost nothing has disturbed it for more than a century. It was not lifted, no artifacts were taken. It remains in the exact place where it sank, silent, unmoving, and still resting beneath the ice. A ship crushed by Antarctica, but never truly lost. Number 8, USS Lexington. Beneath the Coral Sea, there is a warship where time seems to have stopped. This is not just any wreck. It's an aircraft carrier that witnessed one of the most important naval battles of World War II, the USS Lexington. It was built in the 1920s and was one of the first aircraft carriers of the United States Navy. It came from a battlecruiser design that was canceled because of the naval treaty at that time, so it was converted to become an aircraft carrier. It played a big role in the development of American naval aviation even before the wider war in the Pacific broke out. During the World War II, the Lexington was used in critical operations in the Pacific theater, but during the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1920, everything changed. This was the very first naval battle in history where the two forces never saw each other face to face. All the fighting was done through aircraft. In the middle of the battle, the Lexington was hit by torpedoes and bombs from the Japanese forces. The damage was severe, but it didn't sink right away. What really doomed the ship were the subsequent internal explosions and fires inside the vessel. This was caused by fuel vapors that ignited in the ventilation system. After a few hours, it could no longer be saved. That's why it was ordered to be abandoned and finally scuttled by the USS Phelps so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. After decades, it remained lying at the bottom of the Coral Sea, until an expedition team connected to Paul Allen's research vessel found the wreck in 2018 at a depth of about 3,000 meters. And what they saw was almost like a frozen battlefield under the sea. Some aircraft were still on the flight deck. There were planes with their wings still folded. There were propellers that still looked intact. Some of the anti-aircraft guns were still pointed upwards, as if still ready for a battle that ended long ago. The hull number CV2 could still be seen on the body of the ship. There was even an aircraft with the pilot's name written on its nose section. It was as if they were just left in the middle of a mission. According to marine archaeologists, the depth of the sea and the conditions of the Coral Sea preserved many parts of the ship. That's why some of its structures and equipment remained intact. They were untouched. It's like a moment frozen in history. A warship that fought in one of the most important battles of the 20th century. But now it lies quietly at the bottom of the sea, along with the airplanes that will never fly again. Number 7 is the San Jose shipwreck in the Caribbean. Before it was discovered, it was just a legend, not just because of its wealth, but because of the chaos of the claims surrounding it. Even until now, one ship, but many want to own it. The San Jose was a Spanish galleon in the early 1700s. It was a large and heavily armed ship used to transport wealth from South America to Spain. But on a voyage in 1708, everything changed. In the middle of a sea battle near Cartagena, Colombia, The ship was hit while British naval forces were escorting it. According to historical records, the ship's powder magazine, a place where explosives were stored, exploded and it quickly sank. Within a few minutes, the San Jose disappeared from the surface of the sea. But its real story lasted much longer than the ship itself. In modern times, it became one of the most contested shipwrecks in the world. According to the Colombian government and marine researchers, the wreck was identified at the bottom of the sea in 2015 using deep-sea robotic systems operated in collaboration with oceanographic experts. It was found at a depth of approximately 600 meters in the Caribbean Sea, and according to reports, the footage showed bronze cannons with unique dolphin engravings, a detail that matches the Spanish historical records of the San Jose. This is where the discussion started to heat up. This is not just a simple archaeological discovery. It is said to be one of the most valuable shipwrecks in history. According to estimates from various analysts and institutions, the total value of its possible cargo, gold, silver, emeralds, and other colonial-era treasures, could reach 10 to 20 billion US dollars. But that's not the most complicated part of the story. It became even more complicated because of the legal battle. According to the Colombian government, the wreck is part of their national heritage and is within their sovereign waters. But Spain also claims that it is part of their historical patrimony, as it was a Spanish naval vessel. In addition, a U.S.-based salvage company said they identified the wreck in 1982 and are currently filing a multi-billion-dollar arbitration claim in international courts. Another aspect involves several indigenous groups in South America. Included are the descendant communities of ancient miners in the region, who claim that the wealth aboard the San Jose came from a time of colonial exploitation. So for them, these aren't just treasures. They're part of the history of extracting wealth from their lands. In 2025, there were reports that Colombia recovered some objects from the wreck for the first time. These included a bronze cannon, some gold coins, and porcelain items that may have come from Asian trade routes during the time of the Spanish Empire. Some of these were even shown for public viewing while the debate continued over who really has the right to own the entire wreck. And until now, the San Jose remains underwater. It hasn't been fully recovered, and there's still no final decision on who will get it. A ship that sank more than 300 years ago. But even now, people are still fighting over it on the surface. Number 6, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, Arctic. In the middle of 1845, 2 ships of the British Royal Navy left England for an expedition to search for the Northwest Passage, a possible sea route that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific through the Arctic. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. On board, the ships were more than 120 crew members. They carried supplies expected to last for 3 years. Included were more than 1,000 books, musical instruments, and complete equipment for the long voyage. But when they entered the Arctic, they gradually lost communication with Europe. And that's where one of the longest search missions in history began. For more than a century, rescue expeditions from the British Empire and other groups followed. There were traces found, abandoned supplies, notes, and Inuit testimony about the last sightings of the expedition. But the ship itself, its location, couldn't be determined. That is, until modern technology changed everything. In 2014, Parks Canada found HMS Erebus near King William Island using sonar scanning. And in 2016, HMS Terror was also discovered in Terror Bay. Even more surprising, the ships were almost completely intact. The hatches were closed, the windows were intact, there were still bottles on the cabin shelves, and the steering wheel was still in position. For the first divers, it was like a ship that had just been abandoned, even though more than 170 years had passed. According to Parks Canada, the extreme cold and lack of oxygen on the Arctic seabed are the reasons why the ships were preserved, causing the wood and metal to deteriorate slowly. Artifacts have been recovered, such as Royal Navy equipment, plates with the Franklin Expedition crest, navigational tools, and personal belongings of the crew, while others remain in situ as protected archaeological sites. 2 ships set out to find a passage through the world, but they themselves became one of the coldest and longest-standing mysteries of exploration. Finally found on the quiet Arctic seabed, where almost nothing moves and almost nothing is forgotten. Number 5. SS Central America. There are shipwrecks that are not just simple stories of sinking, but stories of wealth that directly affected the history of the economy. One of these is the number 5 SS Central America, a large sidewheel steamer that sailed in the mid-1850s during the California Gold Rush, when thousands went to America to seek their fortune. They were searching for gold, but instead of making it home, the ship was caught by a powerful hurricane in the Atlantic near South Carolina and sank on September 12, 1857. Along with the ship was a huge cargo of gold, coins, nuggets, gold bars, and the personal wealth of hundreds of miners. It is estimated that around 3 tons of gold were lost at sea, and this became one of the reasons for the financial panic of 1857 in the United States. The wreck remained at a depth of about 2,000 meters under the Atlantic for more than a century, until 1988, when it was discovered by ingenieur Tommy Thompson using custom-built deep-sea robotic systems funded by private investors. What the team saw was like time frozen under the sea. Thousands of gold coins that were almost still intact, gold bars with serial numbers and mint marks from the San Francisco Mint, and nuggets that seemed like they hadn't gone through refinement, estimated to stretch over more than 100 meters. The total recovery was worth millions of dollars, but after the success, a fierce legal battle followed over who owned the treasure. Various insurance companies that paid claims back in 1857 claimed ownership rights, and the case dragged on for many years. Eventually, settlements were reached, but the story didn't end there. Tommy Thompson himself disappeared from public view in 2012 and was later found hiding in Florida under a different name, according to law enforcement reports. He was arrested and faced contempt of court for not disclosing the location of some gold coins, and in 2020 he pleaded guilty to fraud charges. Meanwhile, most of the gold from the SS Central America was auctioned off and returned to the market. Pieces from the gold rush era that resurfaced after more than a century under the Atlantic. Number 4, Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, Atlantic Ocean. There are shipwrecks that aren't just about gold or treasure. Sometimes it's about who has the right to own history itself. One of the biggest examples of this is the Spanish warship Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. In the early 1900s, it was a 34-gun frigate of the Spanish Navy that was part of a convoy traveling from South America back to Spain. But in 1804, in the middle of the Atlantic, they were intercepted by British forces. The ship was hit in the battle, and it quickly sank along with its cargo of gold and silver from Spain's colonial territories. For more than 2 centuries, the wreck remained buried under the sea, until the modern era, when the commercial deep-sea salvage industry emerged again. On the 27th, a U.S.-based salvage company called Odyssey Marine Exploration announced that they had found a large shipwreck in the Atlantic, west of Gibraltar. According to their report, they recovered approximately 17 tons of gold and silver coins from the seabed. Those were thousands of coins, almost 500,000 pieces, which were even loaded onto a chartered aircraft bound for the United States for storage and legal processing. This is where one of the hottest maritime legal battles in modern history began. The company did not immediately name the ship where the treasure came from, but later, Spain identified the wreck as the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. And this was where the issue became the center of the controversy. According to Spain, it was a sovereign warship of their navy. So even though it sank, everything inside it still remains the property of the state. But according to the salvage company, this is already an abandoned wreck that has long been lying in international waters, so it can be recovered as commercial salvage. The case went to the U.S. federal courts, through appeals, and finally to the U.S. Supreme Court. Spain's legal arguments, backed by the U.S. government, argued it cannot be considered.
Noportahan ng US government.
This is a sovereign military vessel. This means that even if it stays underwater for hundreds of years, It remains the property of the country that owns it. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court did not accept the final appeal of the salvage company, and Spain ultimately won. The entire treasure, which was approximately 17 tons of coins, was returned to Spain using military aircraft and placed in the National Museum, where it is now permanently on display. According to legal analysts, this became an important precedent in international maritime law because it reinforced the principle that sovereign warships remain the property of their country even after several centuries have passed. For the salvage company, it was a huge financial loss after spending millions of dollars on the operation and legal battle. But for Spain, a part of their history was returned. Under the Atlantic, the wreck that became the center of one of the most important legal battles in maritime exploration still remains. Silently, buried in the seabed while its treasures have long returned to their origin. Number 3, Mary Rose. In the history of the English Navy, there is one ship that became a symbol of the King's power, the Mary Rose. It was a large warship during the time of Henry VIII that served as the flagship of the English fleet for more than 3 decades and fought against France, Scotland, and the Holy Roman Empire. But on July 19th, 1545, in the middle of a naval battle in the Solent near southern England, it suddenly listed while fighting the French fleet. In just a few moments, it sank. According to historical accounts, the crew on the upper deck were trapped because of the protective netting that was supposed to prevent boarding attacks. From the shore, Henry VIII himself witnessed the sinking of his flagship, which disappeared into the sea within minutes. The wreck remained in the Solent Strait at a depth of about 12 meters and was eventually covered by mud. For many centuries, it was not found until 1971, when it was located by divers and historian Alexander McKee. Divers and historian Alexander McKee, who started a major underwater archaeology project in the UK. In the following decade, more than 19,000 artifacts were excavated from the seabed, items from Tudor life that were almost untouched by time. On October 11, 1982, a section of the Mary Rose's hull was raised in one of the most ambitious marine salvage operations in modern history, watched by around 60 million viewers on the BBC broadcast. A specially designed steel cradle was used to lift about 40% of the surviving hull, which remains one of the most important archaeological recoveries in maritime history. When it was raised from the sea, a ship emerged that you would hardly believe had sunk more than 4 centuries ago. Soaked in mud but still intact in shape, it was immediately preserved using a controlled water spray to prevent the wood from cracking due to sudden drying. The artifacts recovered from inside are like a snapshot of the Tudor world. More than 137 longbows were found, and many of these are still functional. There are leather shoes, musical instruments, a backgammon set with all its pieces, and a barber surgeon kit complete with medical tools. There are also personal belongings of the crew, such as plates, coins, and rosaries, identified based on the location where they were found and the ship's crew list records. Now, the Mary Rose is on display in its own museum in Portsmouth, England. It's located right across from HMS Victory, Admiral Nelson's flagship, at the Battle of Trafalgar. 2 ships from different eras, separated by almost 260 years, but both stand as reminders of power and fate at sea. Number 2, Bismarck, North Atlantic. In the middle of the Second World War, there was a ship considered one of Germany's deadliest weapons. The Bismarck was a massive battleship that had almost no equal during its time. It was long, heavily armored, and had heavy artillery that could compete with any naval force in the Atlantic. At the time of its commissioning in 1940, it was one of the most advanced warships built in Europe, and it quickly became the main threat to the supply routes that kept Britain alive during the war. In May 1941, Bismarck launched its first and last combat mission, known as Operation Rheinübung. In the North Atlantic, it immediately encountered HMS Hood, one of the most famous ships of the Royal Navy. Within just a few minutes, Hood was hit in a critical area. Its ammunition magazine exploded, and it sank within 3 minutes, one of the most painful and shocking naval losses for Britain. Because of this, the Royal Navy launched one of the largest naval hunts in history using almost all available ships. A few days after the chase, on May 27, 1941, Bismarck was cornered after its steering system was disabled due to torpedo damage. This was followed by intense bombardment from HMS King George V, HMS Rodney, and supporting cruisers and destroyers. Thousands of shells and torpedoes hit until the ship eventually stopped responding. There are analyses suggesting that the crew may have deliberately scuttled it to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. After many decades, it was found in 1989 by Robert Ballard at a depth of approximately 4,700 meters, about 650 kilometers west of Brest, France. The hull is still almost intact, including the undamaged main armor belt, although it is deformed due to the severe impact. In 2002, an expedition by James Cameron was the first to enter the wreck using submersibles, where they saw the corridors, compartments, and gun turrets, which had separated from the hull, and each weighed more than 1,000 tons. Germany considers this a war grave, so it remains undisturbed. Today, the Bismarck lies at the bottom of the North Atlantic, still almost intact, as a symbol of a ship that does not easily give up even when defeated at sea. Number 1, RMS Titanic, North Atlantic. In 1985, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution team, led by Robert Ballard, found the Titanic at a depth of approximately 3,800 meters using a deep-sea camera system. A boiler was first seen, proof of the wreck after 73 years since it sank on April 14, 1912. The ship was split into the bow and stern, with a debris field stretching about 600 meters, where plates, shoes, luggage, bottles, and personal belongings are scattered as if frozen in time. The bow stayed mostly intact, buried in mud, while the stern was crushed by the force of the impact. Over the decades, it became the most studied shipwreck because of the story of the unsinkable ship, the lack of lifeboats, and the social divide on board. According to marine scientists, it is slowly being eaten by iron-eating bacteria and deep-sea corrosion, and it may disappear within a few decades. In 2023, another tragedy occurred when a tourist submersible heading to the wreck exploded. Now the Titanic is slowly disappearing under the sea, but it remains the most iconic shipwreck in the world and a symbol of a moment that changed the history of maritime exploration.